Channa and Kanthaka's farewell, the moment the prince left the royal path. According to the tradition, when Prince Siddhartha left the palace, in the deep night, his charioteer Channa and his beloved horse Kanthaka went with him. Together, they quietly passed through the sleeping city of Kapilavastu, and reached a lonely place where the life of a prince and the life of a seeker began to separate. There, Siddhartha took off his jewels and royal clothing, and he sent Channa and Kanthaka back to the palace. The farewell was quiet, but it became a deep turning point, the moment when one person laid down the comfort of the world and began walking toward truth. Today's story begins on the night when the gates of Kapilavastu opened silently in the dark. The palace was asleep, the music of the day had faded, and only a few soft lamps remained in the long halls. The people inside believed that the prince was still resting within the palace walls, but Siddhartha's heart had already been standing on an invisible road. For a long time, he had seen an old man. He had seen a sick person. He had seen a dead body. And he had seen a calm renunciant walking quietly on the road. Those four sights remained in his heart more clearly than the bright walls of the palace. Beautiful clothing, fragrant flowers, royal music, and soft beds could no longer cover the questions rising inside him. Why must one who is born grow old? Why must the body become sick? Why must those who meet one day separate? And is there truly a way beyond this suffering? Before these questions, Siddhartha could no longer live as he had lived before. He was not leaving because he hated anyone. He had not erased Yasodhara from his heart. And he had not forgotten his newborn son Rahula. Rather, because he loved them, the truth of aging, sickness, and death became even more painful and clear. On that night, Siddhartha called Channa. Channa did not fully understand the prince's heart, but with long and faithful devotion, he prepared the horse. Kanthaka was the white horse who had stayed close to the prince for many years. According to the tradition, Kanthaka carried Siddhartha quietly, as if the horse also understood the weight of that night. The three of them moved through the deep darkness and left the palace behind. The gates of Kapilavastu opened without noise, and the night seemed to cover their figures. Channa held the reins and watched the road ahead, while Kanthaka walked gently, as if even his footsteps were trying not to wake the sleeping city. Siddhartha tried not to look back, but many faces may have risen in his heart. There was the hope of King Suddhodana, his father. There was the quiet love of Yasodhara. There was the small breath of Rahula, newly born and still resting beside his mother. To leave them behind was not a light thing. This was not a cold departure. It was a painful step toward a wider compassion. The palace slowly grew distant. The shining walls disappeared into the dark, and an unfamiliar road opened beneath the prince's feet. The night air was cool, and the silence felt heavy. Channa must have felt uneasiness in his heart, because he could not fully understand why the prince was going so far or where this road would lead. At last, according to the tradition, they reached a lonely place where the life of the palace and the life of renunciation parted from each other. Siddhartha stopped there quietly. From that point on, he could no longer continue as a prince. The road ahead had to be walked not as the son of a king, but as a human being seeking truth. Siddhartha removed the jewels from his body. He took off the clothing of a prince. Those shining things had told the world who he was for a long time. They were signs of rank, family, comfort, and power. But now, Siddhartha was ready to lay down not only those objects, but also the name and position that had surrounded him since birth. He gave the jewels and royal things to Channa and told him to return to the palace. Channa was shocked, and his heart may have felt as if it were breaking. For a loyal charioteer who had served the prince for many years, leaving him alone on a strange road must have been deeply painful. But Siddhartha's decision did not waver. He was not pushing Channa away because he lacked love or gratitude. He knew that this road could not be walked by another person in his place. It was a path where one had to lay down protection, status, familiar relationships, and even the old idea of oneself. This was now the path of seeking. Kanthaka also stood quietly, as if he understood the farewell. The tradition says that Kanthaka was deeply saddened when he had to leave the prince. A horse cannot speak with words, but the heart of a being who has shared many years with someone can sometimes be felt even in silence. On that night, Kanthaka seemed not only like a horse, but like the final companion carrying Siddhartha's former life. Siddhartha looked at Channa and Kanthaka. In that gaze, there may have been gratitude, sadness, and the quiet resolve of someone who could no longer turn back. He was not throwing away the years they had shared. He was carrying them in his heart while stepping into a deeper road. At last, Channa could not go against the prince's wish. He received the jewels and royal clothing, and he had to return to the palace with Kanthaka. The silence on the way back may have been heavier than the silence on the way out. The prince was no longer beside them. Only the trace of farewell remained on the night road. Siddhartha was left alone. The palace, the royal name, the familiar protection, and the people who had called him prince were now behind him. Before him lay a road with no comfort, no praise, and no clear promise of what would come. Yet in the center of his heart, one question still remained alive. Is there a way for all beings to be free from suffering? This is how the story of Channa and Kanthaka's farewell quietly comes to a close. This story reminds us that there are moments when we must lay down the life we know in order to walk a truer path. Leaving is not always born from a cold heart. Sometimes, leaving is a quiet decision made for the sake of a deeper love. There are times when we also stand before a familiar place and feel our hearts tremble. We may want to stay, and yet we may feel that something deeper is calling us forward. May the trembling within your own heart slowly show you the path that is honest, gentle, and true.